Their SEC football media days continue today. Day number 2. Mike Grace along with Mike Mote in our studios down in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta, is our friend Colin Lacy. We'll get to him in a matter of moments to talk some Georgia Bulldogs. So stand by for that. Great to have you with us on any of our 20 affiliate partners all across the country, 5 southeastern states, including our friends in southeast Georgia who listen on the super stations, Macon, Pinehurst, and Perry, Blackshear, Waycross, Brunswick, Savannah, and Warner Robins. Going to talk about your Georgia Bulldogs in a little bit as we throw it back to Colin Lacy at the College Football Hall of Fame.
Back from SEC Media Day with Rusty Mansell, the co-owner and publisher for Dawgs HQ. You're also heavily involved with high school recruiting, especially here in the state of Georgia, and that's where I want to start. With as much as everybody talks about what college athletics has turned into, how much have you seen it change on the high school recruiting side of things?
Well, talking about NIL?
Yeah.
I'm involved with Georgia High School in some fashion or form, so kind of involved in some of the private communications. And I think everybody got really paranoid thinking, oh, my gosh, NIL is going to change high school sports and all these kids going to be doing this. It hasn't really changed. Like, kids aren't making hundreds of thousands of dollars. Regions Bank's not sponsoring a tight end from, Rome High School. You know what I mean? There's some kids that had some deals that I would say were pretty large, some trading cards and stuff like that. And that's what NIL is supposed to be.
Yeah.
I don't think it's gotten too crazy as far as that side of it. I'm certainly, if I have a kid at Southeast Bullock that has some marketability and somebody's want to give him a couple $100 a month or $1,000 a month, I love that. I don't think it's really changed. I think everybody got really worried. Now, will it start trickling down into high school more now through colleges? I hope not. We just don't need that type of kind of decisions by young people. But if you can go out and make, as a kid at Cass, Bear McWhorter, who was on a billboard in Cartersville on I-75, he took a lot of his money that he made from that and donated to charity. So that's good stuff there too.
What would you say, as far as the impact goes? We just talked about NIL. Would you say, obviously, the transfer portal when it comes to high school, that was a bigger impact?
Yes.
Probably this
that was
NIL
a
stuff.
bigger
I know
impact.
That was a huge issue.
Yeah, that's a big deal. When I have to have that conversation with, I get high school coaches all the time going, hey, can you speak to our parents? Because we're telling them this and they're not believing us. Mm-hmm. It certainly is something that you deal with, and it's unfortunate. And, I understand some of the colleges I talk to. I'm like, hey, man, y'all going to recruit high school? And he's like, Rusty, if I sign a kid, I got to wait 2 years, I might get fired.
Yep.
When I can go out and sign a kid that has tape from college, I know more about that kid than I do this high school kid that the guy in front of him is not a college athlete. So I kind of get both sides of it. I hate that part of it. It certainly affects a lot of schools and a lot of high schools, and it's taken away a lot of opportunities. I think there's a different path. I had to, I don't really try to make decisions for people, but if I know them and they ask me, I'm like, look, there's nothing wrong with going to a lower level school and getting some tape and then go, the path now is this. Yep. Or you can obviously, if you go to Georgia and you can't play, you can come down and you still can maintain all your goals.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that I think everybody's had to adjust to. But I certainly know, someone like you that was involved in heavily recruiting for your school, a lot of people around the state that handles recruiting, I know they're dealing with those issues. And there's a lot of kids that aren't playing college football, unfortunately, because of the transfer portal.
Yep.
Dive into this 2025 Georgia club, and obviously the biggest thing that everybody's going to be talking about these next couple of days is what quarterback looks like. Gunnar Stockton coming in, taking over as QB1 for Kirby Smart. You've seen him for a long time, like we talked about, heavily involved with high school recruiting in the state of Georgia. You've seen him for a long time. You've seen him succeed for a long time. Tell everybody that hasn't seen him what they're getting at quarterback for Georgia.
Can I say ass?
Sure.
He's a tough ass kid, and if y'all get in trouble, I'm sorry. Put that
There's
on
probably
me.
been worse that was said this morning.
He's a tough joker. I think he's wired right. I think he has a lot of respect. The quarterback position, to me, I've said this a lot of times. It's the one position in sports where the 10 other people in the huddle have to believe in you. It's not in baseball. You can do the ground balls and all that kind of stuff. This guy touches the ball every single play. He's making the decision for 10 other people every time. I think Gunner's got that. I'm not going to beat around the bush and say that there's not questions about him. You start talking about. You look at week 3, he's got to go to Knoxville and be the guy. And you'll walk into Neyland Stadium at 3:30, and they hadn't beat Georgia in a while. They're going to be ready for Gunner to get there. So we're all going to find out together how he acts in there. But if you look at Gunner skill set wise, he's bigger than Stetson Bennett. He's thicker. You know what I mean? So he's not. I think first thing people see in him is like, damn, he's legit 6 foot, probably 6'1.5". He's got a great arm. He can hurt you with his legs. I think he's got great deep ball accuracy. The one thing that kind of worries me just a little bit is if you watch him in the spring game and you watch him against Notre Dame, I think he had 3 batted balls in the spring game. I think he had 2 batted balls against Notre Dame. And you guys, and you especially know being around coaching, you get batted balls and nothing good comes from that. So I don't know. I just don't know if it was kind of a bad run, because I do know that he is taller than Stetson, and Stetson never worried me about getting batted balls. So I would imagine that's going to be an emphasis on something. But you know that teams watch tape, and they're going to know to get their hands up on him. Is it as a release point, that type of thing? I don't know. But in between the tackles, he's had some balls batted, and some of those things right there, some of those things you just you worry about balls in the air, stuff like that.
So one thing, obviously, you talk about comparing him a little bit to Stetson as far as, he's a little bit bigger in stature and that kind of stuff. And we actually were talking about it this morning, and that was kind of my comparison, was that he reminded me of the Stetson Bennett with just the grit and the grind, and just
like
he's just
that.
a gamer.
Yep.
But one thing that we had talked about this morning that, it always worried me with Stetson, but he always came through in the long run, was taking those risks every now and then. The rolling out to the right,
window.
throwing across your body back to the other side of the field. And, Stetson was able to sometimes made some mistakes and threw some interceptions, but also made some really big plays as well. Is that something that we're probably going to see from Gunner, just with him being young and still kind of developing as well as a quarterback?
Yeah, I think Gunner's going to take some chances, and I think Stetson used to take chances. I think the most underrated thing, and you kind of touched on it there, the thing with Stetson is I don't know that I've ever seen at Georgia specifically a quarterback that was better in the fourth quarter every time. Like if the game was on the line, Stetson Bennett, you were going to have to outscore Georgia. Ohio State almost did, but they didn't stop him in the second half. You look at the Alabama game when Alabama and Indianapolis comes back to take the lead on that fumble. I think Stetson Bennett was like 9 for 9 with 2 touchdowns in that fourth quarter, and he got better as the game went on. We don't know that about Gunner, but you start talking about the moxie, you start talking about the grit. He's going to throw some balls in tight windows. Stetson did that at times too. I think that Gunner can hurt you with his legs too, but those are things we're going to find out. What's the decision and what's going to happen when they're down 14 in the fourth quarter, because he's never faced that.
Yep.
Talk about the mentality of this team, especially under Kirby Smart. We've talked a lot about it, of this team believes a lot more than teams across the country, because you've seen the elevation of this program back to where a lot of Georgia fans expect to be, competing for a national championship every year. Talk about that mentality around this team, because it hasn't necessarily always been there for Georgia.
I think it's so cliche to say this, but Kirby practices so hard that games are easier. I think there's so much pressure on you. And I think Kirby Smart on the mic probably intimidates you more than the student section in Alabama. You know what I mean? I remember interviewing Dalen Everett. I don't know if you guys get him tomorrow. He told me the story. He said his freshman year, Kirby got on him so bad on the mic, he didn't realize he was getting on to him. He said, when I got back to the end of the group, and the guy said, "Hey, he's talking to you." He's like, "He was talking to me?" And they're like, "Yeah, dude, he was ripping you." So I think the pressure and the accountability. They do the Bloody Tuesdays and all that. But the amount Georgia tries to put you in game type situations, and I know you hear that coaching type, we want practice to be just like game. I can promise you at Georgia, practice is just like a game. So when you get into those situations, you don't really panic as much.
Well, that's something that, you touch on, and that I remember hearing a lot of players say in interviews, especially when they're preparing for the NFL draft and stuff like that, is it got to where when they were in the games, they were not nearly as tired as the rest of the team, because like you said, practice was harder than the games. And so it really helped them in the long run, especially when you get into that fourth quarter and you're down 7 or you're down 14, and you got to kind of step it up a little bit and take the lead and try to win the game.
You think about how many times Georgia's beaten teams in the second half over the last 3 or 4 years. That is strength. That is conditioning.
Yep.
That is conditioning. Can you think when you're tired? I had a coach, he's no longer there, but I think it was maybe 2019 or 2020. I think it was 2019. Georgia went and played at South Carolina. It was the game DeAndre Baker had that pick 6 against Debo Samuel.
Yep.
The game at halftime was very close, or it was like, Georgia had a 2-point lead, something crazy. Well, that coach told me that South Carolina went in the locker room. He said, we were we were exhausted, dead tired. Georgia comes out in the second half. They go 4 drives, 4 touchdowns. They were ready to play. and they were in much better shape. That's not a Shane Beamer team. That was a different team. So you look at those teams, and Georgia was in much better shape. How'd you do that? You were outworking people in the summer because that was the second game of the year. You were outworking teams in the summer. They were in much better shape. They go 4-4 to open up that second half.
So what would you say going into, obviously finishing up the season last year, coming up just short against Notre Dame, and looking ahead through the spring and this offseason, what would you say is probably the biggest question mark coming into this season for the Georgia squad?
Inexperience. I mean, I think they got 8 returning starters, 9 returning starters. Everyone look at it, and it's inexperience. And I think people get a little bit kind of panicked about that. I'm excited because you get a lot of guys that are just going to start for the first time. They're highly recruited players, and you get a chance to see these guys. Just because they weren't starting didn't mean they weren't really good players. They had guys in front of them. So I think inexperience is something that concerns you, but also should excite you. There's also some new blood in the – I mean, you look at all those guys, and a lot of those guys that left at least won one national championship. They won a couple SEC championships, and you sit there and you grind for like 4 years, and you're like, man, I'm ready to go to the NFL. You know what I mean? And that's not to say they quit on last year, but this particular group, I don't think any of them, maybe 1 or 2 of them on paper, have ever won a national championship on that freshman team. This group of guys, this is their legacy, their team, and I think you're going to see some kind of renewed energy with some younger guys getting a chance for Georgia fans to see them.
Is there a certain position group that you would say that you're kind of interested to see how they perform compared to last year? I feel like the offensive line at the offensive line wasn't a normal offensive line that we've seen in years past, and so I'm kind of interested to see how they kind of mold and mesh together. Obviously, I'm excited about seeing the wide receiver group with having a lot of new guys coming in, and then also, they did a really good job of recruiting and getting some younger defensive linemen in that I think are going to have to make an impact right away.
Elijah Griffin's a kid I think we all agree he's got to play.
Yes.
And this is a guy that's, if he wasn't number 1, maybe number 2, at least number 3 overall player in the country last year. He's 305 pounds. He just ran a 4.75 40 in testing, which is super freaky. And this is
our neck of the woods, Savannah.
Yeah, so this guy's got to play. I think he's going to play. I think the offensive line is a group that's got the question marks around it. But you got to get guys. You take Monroe Freeland, who was, one of the top 2 offensive linemen in America coming out of high school out of Charleston, South Carolina. Had a bad game against Notre Dame. But what people don't realize is his shoulder was shot. Like, he had surgery 2 days later. He played Notre Dame, didn't play great. He had to have surgery just 2 days later. Ernest Green was unhealthy for most of the year, wound up, he had to come out of the Ole Miss game because he was banged up.
Yep.
So you look at these guys, and can they play tackle? Can they're healthy? Are they back? The pieces are there. It's just how you play as a unit. I think, look, man, I know people have opinions of his dad, but I'm telling you right now, Drew Bobo is a freaking NFL player. I mean, this guy is a damn baller. Everybody I talk to, how athletic he is. They lost Jared Wilson, who was a 4th round draft pick. They're not losing an ounce with Drew Bobo. This guy's an unbelievable center, very smart, team leader off the field, coach's kid, what you would expect.
Yep.
But I think people are going to realize when Drew Bobo's there how good they're going to be up front. He's going to help things. And I heard Jason Kelsey talking about playing center, and he was like, nowadays you have to be able to pull. Not only do you have to get to the second level, you have to make the calls, but you have to be able to pull and get out in front of people. And I think Drew Bobo is going to be a guy there who's going to bring some physicality. Michael Morris, kid out of Southeast Georgia from Camden County. Look at Jamal Merriweather, kid out of Brunswick, down there. What can he do? Where is he at? You look at Daniel Calhoun. I'm going to tell you the guy that, you may not hear like right now, but come time like Florida, which I feel like is kind of the midway point, like Juan Gaston, the freshman out of Westlake. This guy's 6'7.5", he's 350 pounds. He's talking about a damn dancing bear now. And this guy is going to play this year. I'm telling you right now, whoever's in front of him has got their work cut out for him because he could play right tackle, he could play right guard, he could play left guard. I mean, this guy is special, and I think he's going to play as a freshman.
Fired up to get it going on the college side, at least in a little over a month. I know your stuff gets wired up a lot faster than that, but Rusty, appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, man, appreciate y'all having me.
Again, Rusty Mansell, co-owner and publisher for Dawgs HQ, also a lot with the Georgia high school recruiting side of things.
And you can find him on social media at Rusty Mansell, MANSELL _. Of course, Dawgs HQ online, Dawgs, DAWGS HQ, and online, same thing, DawgsHQ.com, regular online feature, Rusty's Ramblings. And here's the thing that I wonder, fellas, and Colin, since you guys talked to him, I'll address this to you and Brent first. I think everybody all the attention's on Texas this year.
Yeah.
Sarkeesian and Arch and la-di-da-di-da. They're the pretty girl in the room right now. And nobody's really looking. I won't say nobody's looking at Georgia, but I would guess that Kirby Smart is tickled to have everybody else talking about the Texas Longhorns and not his team. That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is kind of what we talked about with Rusty in the sense that they have made it to where Georgia being the top 2, 3, 4, whatever you want to be, that upper echelon of the SEC, that's just kind of a given every year. And I think it's the mentality change around that team that everybody expects Georgia to be in that top 3. And so when they are, nobody's really talking about it. And then they're trying to figure out who the other 2 are going to be.
Yeah, and that's what I found kind of interesting, and I think it may have been Rusty or somebody else that we were talking to, but yesterday about that we think that Kirby is really embracing this kind of, I won't say they're an underdog role because they're not nearly an underdog what you would expect, but not being in the limelight as much, being like a defending national champion or something like that. And so the one thing that I find interesting and that I think he's enjoying some is, a couple weeks ago, I think it was when they were down in Destin or whatever, that Paul Feinbaum had made the comment on his show about Gunnar Stockton and that Georgia was not going to be able to win with Gunnar Stockton and that kind of stuff. And he had him on a show, and all Kirby said was, message was received by Gunnar. That's all he said. And so I think it's just kind of interesting, and I think that kind of plays into Kirby's hands a little bit. Nick Saban used to always talk about the rat poison, right, of the media and hyping it up. And so I think that Georgia kind of feels like they've got something to prove because in the end, their goal is to win a national championship every single year, and they've kind of put themselves on that pedestal, and they have every right, I feel like, to have that as their goal. And so when they don't do that, they did not achieve their goal. Yes, they won the SEC championship last year in a big game against Texas, and being able to beat Texas 2 times in one season is a huge feat as well. But they still didn't get their goal accomplished, and so I think that they've got a little chip on their shoulders. And I agree that I think that them being a little bit underrated and being kind of behind the scenes compared to a Texas with the Arch Manning coming in, and I really think that that's going to be kind of a motivation too with Gunnar. Is yes, he's this new quarterback coming in. But so is Arch Manning. But a lot of people are talking about Arch Manning, and they're not really talking about Gunnar that much. And so I think that'll kind of be a little chip on his shoulder as well.
Yeah, well, he was a highly regarded quarterback, and this is his team now. And may I remind everybody, as you just said, Georgia went 2-0 against the most beautiful woman in the room, so to speak, in Texas, right? Well, let me also say this. With or without Gunnar, if it was Carson Beck, Georgia's not winning or losing with their quarterback. They didn't win last year because of the guys around the quarterback. They have to improve in the other areas. Gunnar Stockton reminds me a lot of the Stetson Bennett types. Okay, you don't think I can play quarterback? Fine, I'll go prove you wrong.
Yep.
And I think Coach Smart is just fine with that. Like you guys said, I think that's something that's really important to him. You get really started in week 3. The first 2 you're going to win, you would think, regardless of who's playing the quarterback position and how long. After that, it's Tennessee on the road, and they themselves have quarterback issues. Georgia really doesn't get a big, huge test in my mind until the 27th of September when Alabama's in town. And then you get a little bit of a lull, and then you get Auburn, and then you get Texas later, you get Florida and Jacksonville. I mean, those are tough games, but they're down the road a ways. Maybe by then, Stockton's comfortable and everybody's playing the way they should. But I think this is perfect positioning for Kirby Smart's Georgia Bulldogs to make a run this year.
Remember, they beat Texas twice last year. Yes, in the SEC championship game, but also on the road in Austin.
Beat them handily in Austin, man.
They did. Now the Longhorns have to come to Athens, as do the 2 teams that Georgia lost to last year in the regular season.
Ole Miss.
Alabama and Ole Miss, both of them come to Athens this year.
Yep.
Should make for an interesting 2025 for head coach Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs. We owe you a timeout still, just halfway through this Tuesday edition of the Press Box. We got you coming up with more from day 2 of SEC Football Media Days with Colin and Brent, Mike Mote, and Mike Grace, and you on great stations around the Southeast, online, PressBoxRadio.com, and YouTube.com/PressBoxRadio.